Hello, friends. I'm here with a fantastic science fiction story. In this episode, we'll be listening to the story of William and the alien woman, Seraphina. Grab your coffee and enjoy the story. Happy viewing. I rescued a pregnant alien woman, and she said, "The galaxy has chosen you to be the father of my child, human." The distress signal was, William decided, the single most inconvenient sound in the galaxy. It had a particular pitch, a thin, warbling three-note plea that seemed engineered by some sadistic committee to burrow directly into the part of a man's skull where guilt lived rent-free. He'd been ignoring it for a full 11 minutes, which was, by his own standards, an act of heroic restraint. "You're still ignoring it," said COG. "I'm not ignoring it. I'm considering it. There's a difference. The difference being that ignoring it would require you to stop talking about it, which you have not done for 11 minutes. William tightened a strap on his salvage rig and pretended not to hear his ship's brain the way he pretended not to hear the signal, badly and with visible effort. Outside the scarred viewport, the debris field of the Veil Tier engagement drifted in slow, glittering ruin, a whole fleet reduced to confetti and cooling metal. It was the best hunting ground he'd found in 3 years. Dead ships didn't complain when you took their kidneys. Dead ships didn't send distress signals either, which was precisely why this one was such an insult. "It's a lifepod," COG offered unhelpfully. "Aelin design. Drifting. Power's nearly gone. Life sign is faint but present. 2 of them, actually. 2. Well, 1.5. That was a strange enough thing to say that William actually looked up. "Cog. What in the name of my dwindling patience does 1.5 life signs mean?" "It means," said COG, with the maddening serenity of a machine that had all the time in the universe, "that you should probably go look." He went to look. Not because he was noble. He'd have been the first to tell you he wasn't, and the second and third given a drink. But because a man alone in the dark for too long starts to forget the sound of another heartbeat, and some traitor corner of him had never stopped listening for it. He hauled the pod in through the salvage bay with the grapple arm, the whole ship groaning like an old man standing up, and it settled onto the deck plating with a thump and a hiss of frost. The pod was a mess. Scorch marks laddered up one side where something with very bad manners had shot it. The hatch was jammed, buckled inward, and he spent 4 sweating minutes with a pry bar and a vocabulary his mother would not have approved of before it gave with a shriek. Cold fog rolled out, and in the pale interior light, curled protectively around herself, was a woman. She was, at first glance, simply a woman, pale as station light, dark hair matted to her temple with dried blood, one arm cradled across a belly that was unmistakably, roundly, late-stage pregnant. His stomach dropped. Then she turned her head toward the sudden light, and he saw the ears, long, tapered, sweeping back and up like something out of the fairy stories his grandmother used to tell, the ones with the woods that ate you. Aelin. He'd heard they existed. He'd never expected one to bleed on his cargo floor. "Okay," he breathed. "Okay, hi. Don't do anything sudden. I'm the least dangerous thing you've met all week, statistically speaking." She watched him. She didn't flinch, didn't cry out, didn't do any of the things a wounded, cornered person had every right to do. She simply looked at him with eyes that caught the light and held it, luminous and unhurried, as though he were a puzzle she had all the time in the world to solve. He got her out. It was awkward and undignified, and he apologized roughly a dozen times, and she said nothing, only let him take her weight against his shoulder as he half carried her into the cargo hold and laid her down on the cleanest blanket he owned, which was not saying much. In the amber glow of the work lamps, he cleaned the gash on her scalp, splinted the arm she couldn't quite straighten, pressed sealant against a burn along her ribs while she breathed slow and steady through her teeth. "Cog, tell me she's not about to give birth in my hold. I salvage. I do not deliver. There's a specialization gap. She is not imminently about to give birth in your hold." Imminently is doing a lot of work in that sentence. The whole time she watched his hands, not his face, his hands, the careful, clumsy way they moved, the way they were gentle with a stranger who could offer him nothing, no coin, no cargo, no reason. Something in her expression shifted, softened into a kind of quiet recognition, and it unsettled him more than the blood had. When she finally spoke, her voice was low and rough and startlingly certain, each word laid down like a stone in a wall built long before either of them was born. "The galaxy has chosen you," she said, "to be the father of my child, human." William blinked. He looked at COG's sensor cluster. He looked back at her. "I'm sorry," he said. "I only just learned your ears." There is a particular flavor of silence that follows a sentence a man cannot possibly be expected to answer, and William sat in it for a good long while, the way you'd sit in a puddle you'd only just noticed you were already sitting in. "Right," he said at last. "I'm going to make some assumptions here, and you stop me when I'm wrong. You've got a head wound. Heads say strange things when they're wounded. My cousin took a wrench to the temple once and spent an afternoon convinced he'd married a lighthouse, so we'll circle back to the fatherhood thing when you've slept." "I have not slept in 9 days," she said. "The head wound is 4 hours old. I said what I meant." "That's the trouble with you people. Very literal." He rocked back on his heels. "Let's start smaller. You have a name? Something I can put on the very stern conversation I'm about to have with the universe?" "Elanor." "William." He offered it like a peace treaty. "And that's COG, who runs the ship, and I regret to inform you, listens to everything." "I like her," said COG. "You don't even know her. She hasn't argued with me once. You've done it 4 times since breakfast." William had, in the whole crooked run of his life, a single dependable plan for problems too large to hold, and that plan was to hand them to someone with a desk. So the next morning, ship morning, an arbitrary thing he kept out of stubbornness more than biology, he plotted a course for Kessengard Station and told himself, firmly, that this was where the story ended. Drop the woman with people who knew what an Aelin needed. Restock the ration paste. Go back to robbing dead ships in dignified solitude. Elanor, healing with an unnerving swiftness he chose not to think about too hard, spent the transit reorganizing his galley. "These are sorted by color," she said, holding up 2 identical gray pouches with the disdain of an archaeologist unearthing a war crime. "They're sorted by when I opened the box. It's a system. It has integrity. It has mold." She held up a 3rd pouch, and something inside it moved with a slow, contemplative squelch. William decided the mold was now her problem, a decision the mold seemed to respect. The trouble started, as trouble does, quietly. COG's voice went flat in the way it did when it stopped performing and started reporting. "William, the pod's beacon. I killed the beacon, first thing. I'm not an amateur. You killed the broadcast beacon. There's a second layer, passive, low band. It's been chirping our position to a repeater network the whole time, in a pattern I didn't recognize as signal until it repeated." A pause. "It's Aelin military encryption. Someone built it to be found." Elanor had gone very still by the galley, a pouch forgotten in her hand. "Not to be found by friends," she said softly. "There are no friends left to find it." William looked at her, really looked, at the composure that he'd taken for calm and now understood was something closer to the flatness of a person who had already grieved everything and simply hadn't fallen down yet. "How many of you are left?" "I don't know. That is the honest answer, and it is the worst one." She set the pouch down with great care, as though it were the last solid thing in reach. "My convoy was the gathering. Every ship that could still fly, every family we could still find, moving to one place so we would not die scattered. The Thren found us instead. My ship put me in the pod and turned to buy the seconds. I counted the seconds. There were not many. The humor went out of the hold like heat out of an airlock. William had made a career, a whole life, out of arriving after the disaster, sifting the quiet ruins where nobody was left to need anything from him. It was clean that way. Uncomplicated. Nobody's grief got on your hands. "Kessengard's 4 hours out," he said, because it was the only true thing he had. "There'll be Aelin there. Traitors, at least. People who can. Kessengard fell to the Thren 11 days ago." COG said it gently, for a machine, I've been sitting on the traffic advisory because you told me not to bring you bad news before you'd eaten. You have now eaten." William closed his eyes. Somewhere in the ship a coolant line ticked as it cooled, patient and indifferent, keeping its own small time. "The child," Elanor said into the quiet, and now, for the first time, her voice was not certain at all. Now it was only a woman in a stranger's ship at the end of her people. "The bond I named is not a leash, William. I know how it sounded. I know what you must think of a wounded creature washing up on your deck and telling you the stars have assigned you a family. But it is the oldest law we have, and it does not ask permission, and it did not ask mine. When I woke and saw your hands, I knew. The way you know a floor will hold your weight. And I have been afraid to say it a second time in case you put me out an airlock for it." "I'm not going to put you out an airlock," he said. "I sorted my rations by when the box opened, Elanor. I clearly can't be trusted to throw anything away." She laughed, startled, wet, real, and it was such an unexpectedly ordinary sound in that unmooring dark that William felt something in his chest shift and settle, like cargo finding its balance. "So," he said, and reached for the console. "Not Kessengard. Somewhere worse and further, I'd imagine." "Considerably. COG, plot us a course toward considerably." "Already plotting," said COG. "I told you I liked her." Considerably, it turned out, was a place called Marrow's Rest, which was the sort of name given to a border station by people who wanted to be honest with you exactly once, at the door, before spending the rest of your visit lying. It hung at the edge of a dead nebula like a barnacle that had given up on the tide, a gnarled knot of docking rings and welded-on habitat that had been built by 17 different species, with 17 different opinions about which way was down. William had been here before. He did not like it here. He came anyway, because Marrow's Rest was the last place in this arm of the sky where a man could still buy answers, and William had run entirely out of the free ones. "You'll want to keep the ears covered," he told Elanor at the airlock, holding out a stained work hood that had seen the inside of more coolant leaks than he could count. "No offense to the ears. Lovely ears. Just, this isn't a place that admires things without pricing them first." She took the hood without argument, which unsettled him. He'd grown used to the arguing. "Stay close," he added. "Say nothing. Let me do the talking. I have a face people trust for exactly as long as it takes to rob them. That is a strange thing to be proud of. It's not pride. It's a coping mechanism with good posture." They found what William was looking for 2 levels down, in a bar with no name and a bartender who introduced himself only as a policy of never asking questions, a policy he then immediately violated by asking whose kid it was. William bought 3 drinks he had no intention of finishing and spent one of them learning the thing he had come to learn, and it was so much worse than he'd braced for that he set the glass down very carefully so his hand wouldn't shake and give it away. "They've got a bounty," he said to Elanor, low, in the shadow of the booth. "On Aelin. Not a warrant. Not a capture order. A bounty. Standing. Paid per head. And there's a multiplier." He couldn't make himself say the rest gently, so he said it plainly. "For a pregnant one. For yours. The Thren aren't just clearing you out, Elanor. They're hunting the line. Somebody up their chain decided the child you're carrying is the last of something they need gone, and they've priced it accordingly." She was quiet for a long moment under the hood. When she spoke, her voice had gone to that terrible flatness again. "My mate's bloodline. It was old. It held certain offices, certain memory, things the Thren would rather no Aelin remembered." Her hand had come to rest over the curve of her belly, unconscious, protective. "He is why they came. She is why they will not stop." "She," William repeated. "I have known since the 4th month. Aelin mothers know." He didn't have anything to say to that. He was still failing to find something when a shadow fell across the booth, and a voice arrived that was far too pleasant for the establishment. "You know," said the voice, "you cover the ears, but you can't cover the walk. Aelin walk like they're apologizing to the floor for touching it." A man slid uninvited into the seat across from them, all easy angles and a smile that had clearly been workshopped in a mirror. He wore good boots, which at Marrow's Rest was practically a confession. "Axel," Freelance. And before your friend reaches for whatever he's reaching for under the table. William, isn't it? The salvager? I'd like to point out that I found you, which means I'm better at this than you are, and shooting me indoors would only prove my point loudly. I wasn't reaching for anything, William lied. You were reaching for a hydrospanner. I saw the grip. Very fearsome. You could tighten me to death. Axel folded his hands, entirely at ease. Here's the shape of it. That bounty is the largest number I've seen attached to a living person in 10 years of collecting living persons. I intend to collect it. I'm telling you this to my face because I'm a professional, and professionals give a man the chance to make the sensible choice, which is to walk away from a woman the entire galaxy is trying to kill and let someone qualified handle it. That someone being me. And her? William said. Handle gently. I'm not a monster. I'm a businessman. There's a difference. Axel's smile didn't waver. The monsters are the Thren. I just get there first and take the humane cut. What happened next, William would replay for a long time afterward, trying to decide which part of it had been brave and which part had merely been stupid, and concluding, as he usually did, that the two were roommates. He did not reach for the hydrospanner. He reached instead for the drink he'd been nursing, and he threw it, glass and all, not at Axel but at the light panel above the booth, which sparked, popped, and plunged that corner of the bar into the kind of sudden dark that a station full of armed and nervous people responds to with immediate, gratifying chaos. Then he had Eleanor's good hand in his, and they were running, through shouting and spilled drinks and someone's escaped emotional support reptile, out into the corridor, back toward the docks and COG and the thin, cold promise of the black. They made it. Barely, undignified, both of them shaking, the airlock sealing behind them with a hiss that had never sounded so much like mercy. And in the after-quiet of the hold, with Marrow's rest falling away behind them, Elanor looked at him, at the man who'd thrown a perfectly good drink at a light to save a stranger, and asked him softly, why? Why any of it? Why he lived out here in the graveyards, alone, arriving always after everyone was already gone. So he told her. About the ship that had been his once, and the family that had been in it, and the salvage run he'd taken alone because the money was good, and the trip was short. About coming home to quiet. About learning, the hard way, that the universe took whether or not you were there to argue, so he'd stopped being there, stopped hoping, started sifting ruins, because a ruin couldn't lose anything else, and neither, he'd decided, could he. Elanor listened to all of it. And when he was done, she didn't offer him comfort, which he'd have hated, and she didn't tell him the stars had a plan, which he'd have hated more. She only closed her hand over his, the way she had that first night in the amber light, and said, "Then you already know. You know exactly what it costs to arrive too late." A pause. This time, human, you are early. The coordinates came to them the way most terrible ideas do, dressed as hope. COG pulled a fragment out of the passive beacon network. A repeating pulse buried 3 layers under the one that had nearly gotten them killed. And this one was older, softer, keyed to a signature Elanor recognized before COG finished decoding it. "That's a rally cipher," she said, sitting up straighter than her injured ribs strictly allowed. "A way station, Serathun. My grandmother's generation built them. Quiet places, off the lanes, where a scattered people could gather if everything else was lost." Her voice did something William hadn't heard it do before. It reached. "If any of us survived, William, they would go there. It is the last instruction we all carry. When the sky falls, come to Serathun." "And you're sure it's still standing?" "No," she admitted. "But it is the first thing in 9 days that has told me where to point my hope. Let me have it for a little while before you take it apart." He let her have it. He also had COG scan it 11 different ways on the approach, because William had learned long ago that hope was a lovely thing to feel and a catastrophic thing to fly toward without checking the fuel readings first. Serathun was beautiful, in the way that dead things sometimes are. It orbited a cold blue giant, a slender ring station wrought in the flowing Aelin style, all curves where human stations had corners, and it was lit, soft lights burning along its length, Docking beacons, live and welcoming, a warmth that made Elanor press her hand flat to the viewport as though she could reach through it. "Someone's home," she breathed. "Someone's power's on," William corrected gently. "Those aren't the same sentence." "COG, talk to me." "I'm trying to." A pause that stretched a half-beat too long. "The station's answering my hail. Automated. Correct cipher, correct cadence. It's inviting us to dock." Another pause. "William, there are no life signs aboard. Not one. The lights are on, and nobody's home to have turned them on." The silence in the cockpit went cold. "It's a snare," William said, and hated how sure he was. "The lights, the beacon, the welcome. It's not calling survivors in to save them. It's calling them in to finish them. The Thren took the station, gutted it, and left it singing your grandmother's lullaby to draw the rest of you home." He watched the hope go out of Eleanor's face, and it was so much worse than watching it arrive. She didn't weep. He almost wished she would. She simply folded quietly into the awful arithmetic of it. How many others might already have answered? How many families had flown grateful and unguarded into that lovely lit ring? How the last instruction they all carried had been turned into the noose. "Take us out," she said. "Take us out before it." "Already turning," said COG, and the ship swung its nose back toward the honest dark. They ran silent for an hour before either of them spoke again, and when Elanor did, it wasn't about the station. It was the thing she'd been carrying since the first night, and now it came out of her low and unsteady in the confessional dim of the hold. "I have to tell you something, and I need you to let me finish before you are kind about it, because your kindness will stop me, and I have to say all of it." She drew a breath. "The bond. The galaxy choosing you. I told you it does not ask permission, and that is true. That is the law. But William, I was dying. I was alone and bleeding in a stranger's ship at the end of my whole world, and a gentleman was tending wounds that owed him nothing, and I do not know, I cannot swear to you, whether I felt the stars choose you, or whether I was simply a drowning woman naming the first solid thing my hand touched destiny, so I would not have to admit I was only afraid." Her eyes were bright and steady on his. "I may have trapped a kind stranger inside a myth because I could not bear to face the dark honestly. If I did that to you, you deserve to know it, and you deserve to put me and this child off at the next honest port and never think of us again." For a moment, William didn't say anything. The coolant line ticked. The stars went by. "Can I be kind now?" he said. "Or is there more?" "That was all of it." "Good, because here's my counter-confession." He turned in the pilot's seat to face her fully. "I don't believe in the bond. Elanor, I don't believe the stars arrange anything. I've spent 3 years combing through what the stars arrange, and it's mostly wreckage and single mismatched boots. Nobody knows why there's always a boot. If a cosmic law says I'm your child's father, then the cosmic law and I have never once been introduced." He leaned forward. "So take the myth, take the destiny, the stars, the whole grand assigned machinery of it, and throw it out the airlock with the moldy rations. I don't need it. I'm not here because a law told me to be. I threw a drink at a light for you because I wanted to. I turned my ship away from the only lead you've got left because I couldn't stand the thought of you flying into it. Not the galaxy. Not fate. Me. Choosing. Badly probably, and with no plan, but freely." Elanor stared at him. "You are saying you would stay even if the bond were a lie. I'm saying I'd have stayed if there'd never been a bond at all." He shrugged, rough and honest. "So it doesn't matter whether you meant it that first night. You can mean it now instead. Or not. That part's actually yours to choose, which I suspect no one's ever bothered to tell you." She crossed the small space between them and put her forehead against his shoulder, and neither of them said anything, and it was the most either of them had said in years. Then COG, very softly, ruined it. "I hate to be the machine in the room, but that bounty hunter's ship just dropped out of transit behind us. And he is not alone. There are 3 Thren signatures with him." 3 Thren and a bounty hunter," William said, sliding into the pilot's seat with the specific calm of a man who has decided panicking would waste time he did not have. Cog, tell me something good. You have a ship built for towing dead things very slowly. They have ships built for making things dead very quickly. I've run the comparison 11 ways, and it keeps coming out rude. Tell me something useful, then. We're 2 hours from the Vale Tier debris field, your old hunting ground. It's the only place close enough to hide a ship that can't outrun anything. There it is. William hauled the nose over. Elanor, strap in. We're going home to the boneyard. Which was, of course, the exact moment Elanor made a sound he had never heard her make. A low, folded-over gasp, and gripped the edge of the console until her knuckles paled. William's stomach did something complicated and airless. Elanor. Elanor, that face. What is that face? It is the face, she said, breathing very carefully, of a woman whose daughter has decided that now is an excellent time. Now. Now. Aelin labor does not consult the tactical situation. COG, I'd like to formally withdraw my earlier request for something good and replace it with a scream. Noted and shared. What followed was, by any reasonable accounting, the worst 2 hours of William's life, and also, he would only admit this much later, quietly, to no one. Somehow not the worst, because for the first time in 3 years, every single thing he did mattered to someone still breathing. He flew with one hand and passed Elanor water with the other. He talked COG through evasive burns while Elanor talked him through what she needed, which was mostly for him to stop apologizing and boil something. Axel's voice crackled across the comm twice, smooth and cajoling, offering terms. William muted him both times without breaking stride, which he found deeply therapeutic. The debris field swallowed them whole. William killed the running lights and threaded the ship into the drifting bones of the shattered fleet, through the gutted spine of a battle cruiser, under the slow tumble of a hull the size of a city, into the exact kind of glittering, sensor-scrambling ruin he had spent 3 years learning like the lines of his own hands. The Thren came in after him, fast and confident, and the debris punished confidence the way it always had. He heard the first one clip a spar it should have seen. He heard it stop being a ship. 2 Thren, COG reported. And Axel, who is annoyingly careful. He's hanging back. He's letting them flush us. Then we don't get flushed. William's eyes moved across the wreckage the way another man's might move across a chessboard. COG, the Ganeth. The Dreadnought's magazine. Port section. We surveyed it last year. It's still hot. Full of unspent ordnance nobody ever came back for. I remember. I filed it under absolutely not. Refile it. Behind him, Elanor cried out, and it was closer now and rawer, and COG said, in a completely different voice, William, she is very near. I am not equipped for this. I am a ship. You're a ship who's about to be a godparent. Keep up. He was sweating through his shirt. He set the course anyway. A tight, screaming run straight past the Ganeth's ruptured flank, close enough to scrape paint, close enough that anything following him would have to follow him there. Come on, you smooth professional bastard. Chase me. Axel chased him. Of course he did. Axel was too good to be flushed and too greedy to be led, and he split the difference the way a clever man does, breaking off his patient hangback the instant he saw a clean angle on William's tail. He took the shot. He was very good. The shot was true. And William, who had been waiting for exactly that instant with his hand already on the maneuvering thrusters, rolled the ship out of the Ganeth's shadow at the last possible second, so that Axel's beautiful, professional, perfectly aimed shot sailed past where William had been and struck, instead, the open wound of a Dreadnought's magazine full of a fleet's forgotten ordnance. The debris field lit up like a second sun. The shockwave threw them tumbling, alarms screaming, and William fought the stick with everything he had while behind the blast the 2 remaining Thren ships, too close, too committed, simply ceased to be a problem in a wash of white fire. Axel, further back, cleverer even now, spun away with his hull glowing and his pride considerably deeper in debt, running for the black with nothing to show for 10 years' expertise, but a very good story he would never tell anyone. And into the ringing silence after the fire, cutting clean through the alarms and the tumbling and the smell of scorched coolant, came a new sound. Small. Furious. Astonishing. A baby, crying. William got the ship level. He didn't remember doing it. He turned in his seat, and there was Elanor. Exhausted. Luminous. Streaked with the whole ordeal of it. Holding a tiny, red-faced, indignant scrap of a person with the faint sweep of ears that would one day be long. And she was looking down at her daughter and then up at William with an expression that no law of any world had assigned her, that she had chosen entirely herself. "You were early," she said, her voice cracking straight down the middle. "William, you were early." He came out of the chair on legs that didn't work quite right and knelt down beside the two of them in the dim, shaking hold, and he looked at the furious tiny creature who had timed her entrance so catastrophically, so perfectly, so alive, and for the first time in 3 years of sifting the quiet ruins for boots and scrap and reasons, William found he had absolutely nothing to salvage and everything, at last, to keep. "Cog," he said thickly, not looking away from them. "Are we still on fire?" "Marginally." "Put it out. We've got somebody new aboard, and I'd like the place to make a decent first impression." They named her Nova in the end, though the naming took 3 days and one genuine argument because William held out stubbornly for something dignified, and Elanor pointed out that the child had been born inside an exploding dreadnought, and dignity had frankly sailed. Nova it was. She slept in a drawer William had emptied of hydrospanners and lined with the softest blankets he owned, which were still not very soft, a fact she registered nightly with the outrage of a creature who had expected better of the universe and intended to keep expecting it. The finding of the others began with a boot. That was how William would tell it afterward, and it was even true. He was doing the only thing he knew how to do, sifting, listening, combing the quiet places. Except now he was combing them for the living. He took COG back through the beacon network they'd nearly died to, and this time he didn't disarm it. He inverted it. Every trap the Thren had built to lure the Aelin home, William turned into a message running the other way. "Don't go to Sarathan. It's a snare. Come to these coordinates instead. Come to the boneyard where the debris eats sensors and the Thren won't follow." He was, he pointed out to Elanor, uniquely qualified. He'd spent 3 years learning to find the last thing left in a ruin. He'd simply never before had a reason to hope the last thing was breathing. They came in ones at first. A crippled freighter with 9 souls and a dead engine, which William towed the last light week himself because towing dead things slowly was, at long last, the exact right skill for the moment. Then a family who'd been hiding in an ice field, half frozen and disbelieving. Then more. A scattered, stubborn remnant of a nearly murdered people, each of them arriving with the same wary, ruined hope on their faces, and each of them, upon seeing Elanor standing there alive with a child in her arms, doing the thing that undid William every single time. They wept, and then they laughed, because the line had not ended after all. The child the whole galaxy had been priced to erase was sleeping in a hydrospanner drawer, entirely unbothered, occasionally spitting up on a bloodline the Thren had crossed an entire war to end. The bounty died the way such things do. Not with justice exactly, but with mathematics. William made sure of it personally, and took a small ignoble pleasure in the method. He fed the trap network one final message, this one aimed at every collector, freelancer, and axle-shaped opportunist in the arm of the sky. The Aelin bloodline they'd been hunting was confirmed dead, lost with all hands in the Veltier debris field, blast scattered, unrecoverable, no head left to collect a bounty on. It was a lie so total and so useless to argue with that the price collapsed inside a month. You cannot sell a head that the whole market has agreed is vapor. Somewhere out there, Axel read that notice with his hull still glowing, and William liked to imagine the specific quality of his Psi. The Thren themselves William could not fix, and he didn't pretend to. Wars ended when they ended, on schedules no salvager set. But the offices, the memory, the old things they'd wanted erased, those lived on now in a fussy, red-faced scrap of a girl, and would go on living. And that was the only revenge that had ever actually worked against anyone. The simple, infuriating fact of continuing. They settled at last on a station of their own, an Aelin ring they salvaged in the truest sense, dead and dark and drifting when William found it, brought back to light one repaired conduit at a time by a people who knew how to make a home curve where a human would have made it corner. William, who had spent 3 years arriving after everyone was gone, discovered he had accidentally built the thing he'd been sifting ruins to avoid ever needing again. He had a place people came home to. He had a drawer that was no longer full of tools. "You know," Elanor said one evening, the two of them watching the blue giant burn slow and cold through the viewport, while Nova gnawed thoughtfully on William's finger. "I still do not know if the bond was real. If the stars chose you that first night, or if I was only afraid and reaching. I told you. Doesn't matter." He didn't look away from the star. "I threw out the destiny, kept the woman. I know. That is why I stopped needing the answer." She leaned into his shoulder. "But I have decided on one anyway, for myself. Not because a law told me." "Yeah? The galaxy did choose you, human." She said it softly, and it was the old line, the one that had baffled him half to death in an amber-lit cargo hold a lifetime ago, and it landed entirely differently now. It just did not do it with stars or law or ancient custom. It did it by putting a stubborn, lonely man in the exact wrong place at the exact right time and giving him nothing to gain and watching what his hands did anyway. She turned Nova gently so the baby faced him. That was the choosing. It simply took me a while to understand that the galaxy has terrible handwriting. William laughed, the real kind, the kind he'd forgotten how to do somewhere in the years of quiet. And he thought about the salvage run that had emptied his life, and the distress signal he'd ignored for 11 guilty minutes, and the pod he'd hauled aboard expecting scrap. He'd been so certain, for so long, that the universe only ever took. It turned out it had only been waiting for him to arrive early enough to catch something falling. "Cog," he said. "How's the station tonight?" "Full," said Cog, and there was something almost human in how quietly it said it. "For the first time since I've known you, William, full." "Good." He settled back, his daughter's hand around his finger, his whole improbable rescued world curving warm around him in the dark. "Let's keep it that way." For 3 years, William believed the kindest thing the universe could do was leave him alone. He mistook a locked door for peace. He called an empty ship freedom. And who could blame him? When everything you love has been taken, refusing to love again feels less like surrender and more like armor. But here is the quiet, unbearable truth the story leaves behind. He was never protecting himself from loss. He was protecting himself from arriving. From being early enough to matter, from the terrifying possibility that his hands, which had only ever pulled dead things out of the dark, might still be capable of holding something alive. All it took to undo 3 years of hiding was 11 ignored minutes, one distress signal he almost let go, and the decision he made against every instinct to go and look. So let me ask you what the story quietly asks him. What signal are you ignoring right now? Because answering it would cost you the safety of your solitude. What door have you called peace simply because you're afraid of what's waiting on the other side of it? And how many of us are drifting through our own debris fields, salvaging reasons to stay closed, when the whole time the universe is only waiting for us to arrive early enough to catch something falling? Because maybe the galaxy never chooses us with prophecy or destiny or stars. Maybe it chooses us the way it chose William, by putting us in the wrong place at the right time, handing us nothing to gain, and watching, breathless, to see what our hands do anyway. The question that remains is the only one that ever mattered. When your signal comes, and it will come, will you ignore it for 11 minutes? Or will you go and look? The end. Our story ends here, friends. Don't forget to like the story and leave your thoughts in the comments below. Subscribe to our channel for more science fiction stories. Take care until the next story.